Dr. Evelyn Thorne's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the Metropolitan Museum of Curiosities. The sound echoed through the empty halls, a staccato rhythm accompanying her brisk pace. It was well past midnight, but for Evelyn, the night had only just begun. She approached a plain wooden crate sitting incongruously in the centre of the Egyptian wing. The delivery had arrived just before closing, and Evelyn had spent hours poring over the paperwork, searching for any clue about its origins. Now, standing before it, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Well," she muttered to herself, "let's see what all the fuss is about." With practiced ease, Evelyn pried open the crate. Inside, nestled in a bed of straw, lay an object that defied description. It appeared to be a mirror, but its surface swirled with an opalescent mist that seemed to move of its own accord. The frame was crafted from a dark metal, etched with symbols Evelyn had never encountered in all her years of study. He lifted the artifact from its container. A chill ran down her spine. The mirror was surprisingly light, almost as if it wasn't there at all. Evelyn carried it to a nearby display case, her reflection flickering in and out of focus on its misty surface. "You're certainly not what I expected," she said, carefully setting the mirror on a stand. But then again, the unexpected is what we specialise in here. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself drawn to the mysterious artifact. She spent hours studying it, trying to decipher the strange symbols on its frame. But for every question she answered, 10 more sprang up in its place. It wasn't until a week after the mirror's arrival that things took a turn for the bizarre. Evelyn was working late as usual when she heard a sound coming from the Egyptian wing. It was a soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakably human. Heart pounding, she made her way towards the sound. As she entered the room, her eyes were drawn immediately to the mirror. Its misty surface was alive with movement, swirling faster than she'd ever seen before. And then, as if in a dream, Evelyn saw a hand reaching out from the mirror's depths. Without thinking, she grasped it, intending to pull whoever it was to safety. But instead, she felt herself being tugged forward, the world spinning around her as she fell into the swirling mist. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she found herself in a place that defied logic. Gone were the familiar walls of her museum. In their place stretched an endless expanse of filing cabinets, reaching impossibly high into a starless sky. The air hummed with the sound of 1,000 typewriters, punctuated by the occasional frustrated sigh. "Oh, wonderful," a dry voice said behind her. "Another one." Evelyn spun around to find herself face to face with a man dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that seemed to be made of parchment. He peered at her over a pair of half-moon spectacles, his expression a mix of boredom and mild annoyance. Where am I?" Evelyn managed to ask, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The man sighed, pulling out a pocket watch that ticked counterclockwise. "You're in the Afterlife Administrative District, of course." Section 7B to be precise. Unscheduled arrivals and misplaced souls. He looked her up and down. Though you don't seem to be dead from... How inconvenient. Evelyn's scientific mind battled with the impossibility of her situation. The afterlife? But that's not... I mean, I was just in my museum and there was this mirror. Ah, the man said, his interest piquing slightly. The doorway of departed destinies. I thought we'd catalogued all of those. He pulled out a thick ledger from thin air and began flipping through it. Must file a report on that. Can't have the living popping in and out as they please. Bad for productivity. As Evelyn struggled to find words, she became aware of another presence nearby. A young man, probably in his early 20s, was watching their exchange with a mix of hope and trepidation. Unlike the paper-suited bureaucrat, this man seemed solid, real. His eyes met Evelyn's, and she saw a profound sadness there. "Excuse me," the young man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But did you say you came through a mirror? In a museum?" Evelyn nodded, still too shocked to form a coherent sentence. The man's face lit up with a desperate kind of hope. Then you can help me. You can help me get back." The bureaucrat cleared his throat loudly. "Now, see here, Oliver. We've been over this. Your paperwork is missing. Until we locate it, you simply can't be processed. Rules are rules." "But I don't belong here," Oliver protested. "I'm not supposed to be dead." Evelyn found her voice at last. "What do you mean you're not supposed to be dead?" Oliver turned to her, his eyes pleading. "There was a mistake. I was in an accident, delirious dead for 2 minutes. But they brought me back. Somehow I ended up here instead of waking up. They said my soul got misfiled." He glared at the bureaucrat. "And they won't let me go back because they can't find the paperwork." The bureaucrat sniffed indignantly. "Clerical errors are exceedingly rare, I'll have you know. I'm sure your file will turn up eventually. Perhaps in a century or two." Evelyn looked between Oliver and the bureaucrat, her mind racing. This was madness, and yet she couldn't deny the evidence of her own eyes. She was standing in the afterlife, talking to a lost soul and a celestial paper pusher. And somehow, impossibly, she was the only one who could do something about it. "All right," she said, drawing herself up to her full height. "I think I understand. Your system has made a mistake, and this young man's life is at stake. Now, I've spent my entire career cataloguing and organising the unknown. If anyone can find this missing paperwork, it's me." The bureaucrat raised an eyebrow. Oh, and who exactly are you to be making such bold claims? Evelyn smiled, extending her hand. Dr. Evelyn Thorne, Chief Curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Curiosities. And I believe you have a filing system that needs some serious reorganization. As she shook the bureaucrat's papery hand, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder what she'd gotten herself into. But looking at Oliver's hopeful face, she knew she couldn't turn back now. Somewhere in this impossible realm of endless files and red tape, a young man's future was waiting to be uncovered. And Evelyn Thorne was just the woman to find it. As Evelyn's words hung in the air, the bureaucrat's demeanour shifted from mild annoyance to grudging interest. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at her with a newfound curiosity. A curator, you say? Well, de Thorne, I suppose we could use a fresh perspective on our filing challenges. He extended a hand towards a towering wall of cabinets. I am Archibald Grimshaw, Senior Clerk of Unresolved Cases. Welcome to my domain. Evelyn surveyed the endless rows of filing cabinets stretching in every direction. The enormity of the task before her was daunting, but she'd never been one to shy away from a challenge. Right, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Let's start with the basics. How is your system organised? Grimshaw's face contorted into what might have been a smile. Oh, it's quite simple, really. We file souls by date of departure, cause of expiration, karmic weight, and zodiac sign. Cross-referenced, of course, with past lives, unfulfilled destinies, and potential reincarnation trajectories. Oliver groaned. Paul, he says, I've been lost in this maze for what feels like an eternity. Evelyn patted his shoulder reassuringly. Don't worry, Oliver. We'll find your file. She turned back to Grimshaw. Now, you said Oliver was only technically dead for 2 minutes. Surely that would narrow things down. Grimshaw's expression soured. Ah, yes, the nearly departed. Always causing confusion. We have an entire subsection for them. He gestured towards a particularly chaotic corner of the room, where papers flew between cabinets of their own accord and harried-looking clerks chased after them. As they approached, Evelyn noticed something odd about the flying papers. Each one seemed to flicker in and out of existence, there one moment and gone the next. She reached out to grab one, but her hand passed right through it. Curious, she murmured. These files seem to be in a state of quantum flux. Grimshaw nodded approvingly. Very observant, Dr. Thorne. The nearly departed exist in a superposition of states. Their files reflect that uncertainty. Oliver watched the papers with a mix of fascination and frustration. My file is... what? Half here and half not? Precisely, Grimshaw confirmed. Which makes cataloguing them a nightmare, let me tell you. Evelyn's mind raced, drawing connections between this ethereal filing system and her own work in the museum. What if we approached this from a different angle? In my museum, we often use thematic links to connect seemingly unrelated artifacts. Perhaps we could apply a similar principle here. She turned to Oliver. Tell me everything you remember about the moments before and after your accident. Every detail, no matter how small. As Oliver recounted his experience, the screech of tyres, the smell of burned rubber, the sound of a heart monitor flatlining, Evelyn noticed the flying papers reacting to his words. Certain sheets would glow brightly or flutter more vigorously at specific details. There, she exclaimed, pointing to a particularly active file. That one seems to be resonating with Oliver's story. Can we examine it more closely? Grimshaw looked impressed. I say, that's rather clever. He snapped his fingers, and the glowing file zoomed into his hand. As he opened it, his eyes widened. Well, I'll be a monkey's ethereal uncle. It's Oliver's file! Oliver rushed forward, peering at the document. That's me. That's my life. His face fell as he read further. But it says I'm scheduled for reincarnation. Tomorrow. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. What happens if he's reincarnated while his physical body is still alive? Grimshaw paled, which was quite a feat given his already spectral complexion. Nothing good, I'm afraid. A soul divided across two living beings could tear the very fabric of existence. Then we have to get him back, Evelyn said firmly. Now that we've found his file, surely you can process his return. The bureaucrat fidgeted uncomfortably. Well, you see, it's not quite that simple. There are protocols, approvals needed. The Committee of Cosmic Calibration must be consulted, the Karmic Adjustment Board notified, not to mention the mountains of paperwork. Paperwork, Evelyn interrupted, an idea forming. What if I offered to help reorganize your filing system? Streamline the process. In exchange for expediting Oliver's case, of course. Grimshaw's eyes lit up with an almost manic gleam. Reorganize the system? Oh, we haven't done that since the Black Plague caused that awful backlog. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. It would ruffle some feathers upstairs, but oh, why not? You've got yourself a deal, Dr. Thorne. As Grimshaw bustled off to begin the necessary preparations, Oliver turned to Evelyn, his eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, he said softly. I was beginning to lose hope. Evelyn smiled warmly. Don't thank me yet. We still have to get you back to the land of the living. and I have a feeling our adventure is just beginning. Little did Evelyn know just how right she was. For as Grimshaw returned with a stack of forms tall enough to blot out the non-existent sun, the true scale of their task began to dawn on her. Somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the afterlife, a clock was ticking. And Evelyn Thorne, curator extraordinaire, was about to embark on the most important cataloguing job of her life and afterlife. As she picked up the first form, a tingling sensation ran through her body. The border between life and death, she realised, was far more permeable than she'd ever imagined. And now, armed with nothing but her keen mind and a borrowed celestial pen, she was about to put that theory to the test. "Right," she said, squaring her shoulders. "Let's make history. Or whatever the afterlife equivalent is." And with that, Evelyn dove into the sea of cosmic paperwork, determined to rewrite the rules of life and death, one form at a time. The afterlife archives stretched before Evelyn like an impossible labyrinth of knowledge and bureaucracy. Towers of filing cabinets loomed overhead, their contents defying the laws of physics as papers floated between drawers, reorganizing themselves in a cosmic dance of information. Evelyn stood before a massive tome, its pages filled with an ever-shifting script that seemed to change language every few seconds. She rubbed her temples, fighting off a headache that throbbed in time with the pulsing of the ethereal lights. "Remind me again why we're doing this?" Oliver asked, his voice tinged with both hope and frustration. Evelyn sighed, flipping another page of the cosmic ledger. "Because, according to Grimshaw, we need to file a petition for extraordinary soul reallocation before we can even think about getting you back to your body. And to do that, we need to understand the system." As if on cue, Grimshaw materialised beside them, his parchment suit rustling with an unseen breeze. "Quite right, Dr. Thorne. I must say your grasp of our procedures is coming along swimmingly." "Why, you've only been at it for..." He pulled out his backwards ticking watch. 72 hours. A new record. Evelyn blinked in surprise. Had it really been that long? Time seemed to flow differently here, stretching and contracting like taffy. 72 hours, Oliver exclaimed. "But that means I've been gone from my body for over 3 days now. What if it's too late?" Grimshaw waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, pish posh. Time works differently for the living. Why, I once had a chap who popped in for a quick chat and returned to find he'd only been in a coma for a decade. Hardly any time at all." Evelyn shot Grimshaw a withering look. Not helping. She turned to Oliver, her voice softening. "Don't worry. We're making progress. I think I'm starting to see patterns in the filing system." She pointed to a series of glowing symbols on the page before her. "See these? They correspond to different aspects of a soul's journey. This one here represents karmic balance, and this one, I think it's for unfinished business. Oliver leaned in, his brow furrowed. What's that big red one there? Grimshaw peered over their shoulders. Ah, that would be the cosmic clerical error designation. Quite rare, I assure you. We've only had a handful in the last millennium. Evelyn's eyes lit up. That's it. Oliver, your case must fall under this category. If we can prove that your premature arrival here was due to a clerical error, we might be able to fast-track your return. With renewed energy, Evelyn dove back into the tome, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of afterlife bureaucracy. As she worked, she couldn't help but marvel at the complexity of it all. Every life, every death, every moment of existence catalogued and cross-referenced in this vast cosmic library. Blended into what felt like days as Evelyn, Oliver, and even the reluctantly helpful Grimshaw pored over records, filled out forms, and navigated the labyrinthine processes of the afterlife. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Evelyn slammed shut the last of a towering stack of books. I think we've got it, she announced, her voice hoarse from disuse. We've completed the petition. Now we just need to present our case to the Council of Fates. Oliver's face lit up with hope, but Grimshaw looked uneasy. The Council of Fates? Oh dear, they're not known for their flexibility. Well, they'd better get flexible, Evelyn said firmly. Because we've got an airtight case, and I'm not leaving until they hear it. As they made their way through the shifting corridors of the Afterlife archives, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and whispers echoed just at the edge of hearing. They arrived at a set of imposing doors carved with scenes of life, death, and everything in between. Grimshaw cleared his throat nervously. Well, here we are. The Chamber of Cosmic Adjudication. Are you sure about this, de Thorn? We could always file for an extension, perhaps schedule a hearing for the next century or so. But Evelyn was already pushing open the doors. No more delays. It's time to set things right. The chamber beyond was a vast amphitheatre, its curved walls lined with countless hourglasses, each one representing a life in progress. At the centre stood a circular dais, upon which sat 3 figures shrouded in mist. Who dares to petition the Council of Fates? A voice boomed, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady despite the awe-inspiring surroundings. I am Dr. Evelyn Thorne, and I come before you to rectify a cosmic clerical error. The mist swirled, revealing 3 ancient beings whose faces seemed to shift between young and old, male and female, human and something else. A clerical error, one of the Fates mused, their voice like rustling leaves. How amusing. And what makes you think you, a mere mortal, can comprehend the intricate workings of destiny? Evelyn stood her ground. Because I've spent the last, however long it's been, learning your systems. And I can prove that a mistake was made. She launched into her presentation, laying out the evidence they'd gathered. She spoke of quantum entanglement between souls and bodies, of bureaucratic oversights and misfiled paperwork. As she talked, the hourglasses around them seemed to pulse in rhythm with her words. The Fates listened in silence, their expressions unreadable. When Evelyn finished, the chamber fell into a hush so profound she could hear the beating of her own heart. Finally, the central Fate spoke. "In all our eons of existence, we have never encountered a mortal quite like you, Dr. Thorne. Your dedication to truth and order is admirable." A flicker of hope ignited in Evelyn's chest. However, the Fate continued, the cosmic balance is a delicate thing. To undo what has been done, even in error, could have far-reaching consequences. Oliver stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "Please," he said. "I know I'm just one soul among countless others. But my life, my real life, it matters. To me, to my family, to everyone I've yet to meet and everything I've yet to do. I'm not finished yet." The Fates conferred in hushed tones, the mist swirling around them in agitated patterns. Evelyn held her breath, acutely aware that the fate of not just Oliver, but potentially the entire cosmic order, hung in the balance. At last, the Fates turned back to them. "We have reached a decision," they intoned in unison. Evelyn, Oliver, and even Grimshaw leaned forward, the tension palpable. "The petition for extraordinary soul reallocation is..." The Fates paused, the silence stretching to an unbearable length. "Granted." The word echoed through the chamber, setting the hourglasses trembling. Oliver let out a whoop of joy, and even Grimshaw cracked a smile. But Evelyn's instincts told her it couldn't be that simple. "What's the catch?" she asked, eyeing the Fates warily. The central Fate's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Perceptive as always, Dr. Thorne." "Yes, there is a condition. To maintain the cosmic balance, an exchange must be made. A soul for a soul." The implications hit Evelyn like a thunderbolt. She looked at Oliver, saw the horror dawning on his face as he realised what the Fates were suggesting. "No," Oliver said, shaking his head vehemently. "I won't let someone else die in my place. I can't." Evelyn's mind raced, searching for a solution. She thought of the museum, of the mirror that had started this whole adventure. And then, in a flash of inspiration, she had it. "What if," she said solely, choosing her words carefully, "what if the exchange didn't have to be permanent? What if we could create a bridge between realms? a way for souls to cross back and forth, maintaining the balance without permanent loss. The Fates leaned forward, intrigued. "Explain," they demanded in unison. And so Evelyn laid out her plan. A proposal so audacious, so revolutionary, that it threatened to upend the very foundations of life and death. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of cosmic forces shifting around her, the universe itself holding its breath. Little did she know that her words were about to set in motion a chain of events that would change the nature of existence itself. The true challenge, she realized, was only just beginning. Evelyn's proposal hung in the air, the weight of its implications palpable. The Fates exchanged glances, their ethereal forms shimmering with barely contained energy. "A bridge between realms," the central Fate mused, her voice a mix of wonder and caution. "Such a thing has never been attempted." "Because it's dangerous," Grimshaw interjected, his parchment suit rustling agitatedly. "The separation between life and death exists for a reason, Dr. Thorne. To tamper with it could unravel the very fabric of existence." But Evelyn stood her ground. "Or it could bring balance," she argued. "A way for the living to understand death, and for the dead to find closure. Imagine the wisdom that could be shared, the healing that could occur." As she spoke, the hourglasses lining the walls began to pulse with an otherworldly light. Oliver gasped, pointing to one that seemed to glow brighter than the rest. That's mine, isn't it?" The Fates nodded in unison. "Your time grows short," they warned. "If a decision is not made soon, your connection to the mortal realm will be severed permanently." Evelyn felt the pressure mounting. She turned to Oliver, her eyes filled with determination. "I have an idea," she said, "but it's risky. Do you trust me?" Oliver nodded without hesitation. "With my life, or afterlife, I suppose." With a deep breath, Evelyn faced the Fates once more. "I propose a trial," she announced. "Let me return to the mortal world with Oliver. If we can find a way to stabilize the connection between realms within, let's say 24 hours, the bridge stays. If not, I'll return here, and you can do with me as you see fit." The chamber erupted into chaos. Grimshaw sputtered protests, the hourglasses chimed discordantly, and even the Fates seemed taken aback. But as the commotion settled, a slow smile spread across the central Fate's face. "Bold," she said, "and foolish. But also intriguing. Very well, Dr. Thorne. You have your trial." Before Evelyn could respond, the world around her began to blur. She felt Oliver's hand grasp hers as reality itself seemed to fold in on them. There was a sensation of falling, of hurtling through space and time, and then they were back in the museum, standing before the mirror that had started it all. Evelyn's colleagues gasped in shock, crowding around her with questions and exclamations of relief. But there was no time for explanations. "Quick," Evelyn said, turning to Oliver. "We need to stabilize your connection to this realm." What followed was a frantic race against time. Evelyn and Oliver worked tirelessly, combining her knowledge of artifacts with his newfound understanding of the afterlife. They etched symbols into the mirror's frame, recalibrated its mystical energies, and wove spells of binding that bridged the gap between worlds. As the final hour approached, Evelyn felt a pull from the other side. The fates were calling her back. With trembling hands, she made the final adjustments to the mirror. "Now, Oliver," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a step through. Oliver hesitated for just a moment, then took a deep breath and walked towards the mirror. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a flash of light, he passed through, not vanishing, but remaining visible on the other side like a window between worlds. Cheer went up from Evelyn's colleagues, but she hardly heard it. Her eyes were fixed on the mirror, watching as the barrier between life and death shimmered and stabilized. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw the fates, now visible in the mortal realm, their expressions a mix of awe and approval. "Well done, de Thorn," the central fate said. "You've succeeded where none have before. The bridge between realms stands." Evelyn smiled, exhaustion and elation washing over her in equal measure. "So, what happens now?" she asked. The fates exchanged knowing looks. "Now," they said in unison, "the real work begins. For you, de Evelyn Thorn, are no longer just a curator of artifacts. You are the guardian of the veil, tasked with maintaining the balance between life and death." As the implications of her new role sank in, Evelyn turned back to the mirror. Oliver stood on the other side, smiling and very much alive. Around him, other faces began to appear, souls seeking closure, wisdom, or one last chance to say goodbye. Evelyn squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges her new position might bring. For in bridging the gap between worlds, she had not only saved Oliver, but opened up a realm of possibilities that would forever change the nature of life, death, and everything in between. The Museum of Lost Souls, it seemed, had gained its most valuable exhibit yet. A window to the great beyond, with Dr. Evelyn Thorn as its keeper.